this is a topic that came out of a desire for creating a space for designers to talk about design and kind of hear from other people in the field, like how they're going about and solving problems, how they're approaching their work, and specifically making it a cross-disciplinary space, because I joined Whipsaw as a kind of like UX product designer, and I learned so much from the industrial designers while I was working here, just like how you approach craft, how like different disciplines solve problems, and I brought that into my own work. And so I wanted to create a space to pull people together from different fields, but around like a similar topic, to kind of have those conversations. And the other part was, it's like kind of, I learned this term from Hillary, like an active prolepsis of like calling the future I want into being, of like, I wanted to have this as a space as well to talk about how we navigate the tensions in our work and how we like create the future that we want. And so I once heard a quote that has really stuck with me ever since I heard it, which is, designers are conduits to power. And so we have like this kind of ability to channel many different things and make different things out of it. And so I'm hoping this conversation tonight brings forward how we can take some of these lessons from people who have many years of experience and just like different viewpoints, different work, and kind of blend that into our own work as well. So just a quick outline of the night. This is the opening intros part. And then after this, Hillary will take us into the panel discussion. There'll be a short Q&A afterwards. And then there'll be just time for a small group discussion and kind of like networking, meeting other people, along with the panelists as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Hillary to get us started.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, she has her own mic.
Yeah. Yes. So can we please give Rachel Arredondo a round of applause? I really appreciate Rachel for having the vision for this event, and she has lots of wild ideas, and I try to say yes to them as often as I can. So thank you for that. So yeah, I'm Hillary Carey. I am a design futurist and service designer. I recently came out of the transition design PhD program at Carnegie Mellon, and Carnegie Mellon's where Rachel and I met. And so I'm your moderator for tonight, and each of the panelists, I've asked them to introduce themselves by way of sort of a question that gets at how they think about the world. So the question is, and I'll start with Charu, what do you think of a lot, and how did your interests come to you?
So I've actually been thinking about design for healing a lot in recent years, and how that came to me was I've spent a lot of time designing in health and social impact, and then a few years ago I realized that a lot of the projects that were most meaningful to me and the ones that I most wanted to advocate for were when we were designing for people after they had experienced traumatic experiences, from being hospitalized for a mental health crisis to ICU nurses post-peak COVID. And so I started to actually look across those projects and look across other folks' projects and things that were out in the world, often in art and literature, and called together some themes that I saw in that work and created a class called Design for Healing or Design for Recovery, depends on where you look, at UPenn, excuse me, and took those kind of meta themes and prototyped a framework for students to use when designing for people after a traumatic experience to help them heal, to help them recover in a non-clinical way, but just to help us as designers design healing spaces and products and services. So actually, design for healing is something I've been thinking about for a few years now. Awesome. And happy to be here.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Aisha.
So for me, I think there's a stat that I saw, like it was maybe a couple of weeks ago, 67% of Americans say that their workplace is toxic. And that's something I think about a lot. Because I actually experienced that, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here in this room. And it doesn't have to be. It's a lot of unnecessary suffering. And so my work is really to help people. It's kind of funny when you start working somewhere and there's these people there. It's like rolling the dice. And then like you hope that it will work out, right? And we all hope that. And so like how come like some time after that you realize it's a toxic place and nobody wakes up and says like, oh, I'm going to bring toxicity to work, right? so a lot of my work is actually to help people understand. As a designer, I design experiences for people to get to a place where they understand that as a collective, there are ways that they can work together that are supportive, that are fulfilling. And so, yeah, I'm going to stop here. I could keep going, but I'm going to stop here. Yeah, so it's something that I think about a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. That resonates with me so much. Should I go next? Yes. Hey everyone, I'm Priyanka. I work at Headspace. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we bring humans and technology together to solve some pressing problems in mental health around, access and equity, and how do you actually help people change their behaviors, because changing behaviors is the start to actually making changes in your life, and that's what leads to like improving health outcomes. I pride myself in being like a values-centered designer. So ever since like I was an industrial designer first, and I used to design furniture, and back then too, like I was drawn to like the sustainable, how do you build sustainable futures, and was actually pretty like worried about like overconsumption, and found myself a desire in me to kind of learn methodologies to like have more strategic impact in organizations, which led me to grad school to like study some of these like strategic design methods, learned about UX, service design, and then worked at a design consultancy also focused on social impact right here in SF. It's called Daylight. They're doing incredible work. I would say you all should check them out. But I was working in education, healthcare spaces a lot, and what I found is like even if the problem was education or like say chronic health challenges, the undercurrent was like lack of access to mental health resources. So I found myself working on building experiences for parents, for kids, for educators, right, that help them or support their mental health. And we used to do a lot of work with nonprofits and research labs, which is where like the innovation is happening, and like the that are applying clinical rigor to how you build these interventions. However, these are also spaces that are largely under-resourced, and they don't have the resources to sustain like building and maintaining these products like over time. So I found myself at a crossroads where I deeply fell for this mission, but like in my current setting, I couldn't see like the scale of impact, which led me to Headspace, where I found both. And Headspace is such a lovable brand that it has a way to destigmatize healthcare, and it's a warm entrance into like the larger world of like mental health. So I spend a lot of time with Rachel here, building experiences, and Leah, helping people, make meaningful changes in their lives.
Thank you. Yeah, Cole, how about you?
Yeah, I'm Cole Derby, Director of Industrial Design here at Whipsaw. I think my background's a bit more unique. I'm the only industrial designer on the panel, but I'm from Ohio. I went to automotive design school in Detroit, and through that experience realized that I have more of a passion for all things design, and I could still have that kind of little kid passion for things that go fast, and engines and space and everything. So, but the whole world around us, I kind of discovered through school that everything is designed by somebody, and so it led me to Motorola in Chicago. So I was working on highly intricate little details on a lot of the Droid Verizon line phones. And through Google acquisition and a lot of turmoil 11 years ago now, I remember looking at design firms across the Bay Area, and there was only one that stood out, and that was this company here. And so looking at the website, there was just product. And so it was very honest about what they did. And I'm a hardware person, I'm physical, so it was like, oh, you guys make stuff, that's me. And so, yeah, it's been 11 years now, and in consulting, it's a wild ride. We work on almost every industry category, and I've found myself working on a lot of healthcare related products, surgical, medical, life science, diagnostic. That's probably about a third of our work. And then almost everything else from consumer electronics to fitness and wearables, and sometimes this crossover between fitness and wellness and health and mental health and design psychology. So there's a lot of blend in the work that we do. And so I've discovered a lot of these other facets just by being here and being able to work on kind of a wide range of different things. Mm-hmm.
And now let's cycle back. I said I wasn't going to call on you guys in order, but I will, Charu. What type of designer do you call yourself, and how did you arrive at that? Do you call yourself the same thing all the time?
I do now, but not over time.
Okay. Yeah.
So I call myself a design researcher and service designer. However, I had kind of like a wobbly path to design, but I like to think wobbly paths are more interesting, although I may just be rationalizing. So I actually started my career in marketing, brand management, just because that was the most creative of what came to career fair in school. And because of that, I was working a lot with designers, with what we called interaction designers at the time and graphic designers. And one of them had even said to me, "You're a designer." And I was super flattered, but I thought, well, that's crazy. I didn't go to art school or design school, and I can't draw like she can, but that's really nice that she said that. And I also never loved what I did. I didn't personally, I didn't love marketing, and I kept trying to find, well, maybe if I market things I care about, like, you know, health and social impact, then I'll love marketing, but I never did. And so I then kind of went, and I moved out here to run marketing for a healthcare startup that was all about price transparency. And when that eventually went away or, you know, shut down, I then thought, okay, let me use this time to figure out what I want to do. And so I did all the things. I read The Artist's Way. I volunteered with like a neuroscientist because I was really interested in human behavior. Social psychologist. I took a neuroscience class in creative writing and did all these things. And then ultimately what happened, I was also freelancing to make some money. And one of the projects I was on happened to be with several IDEO alumni. And at the end of the project, they said, you know, IDEO has been looking for a healthcare business designer for a year. And I said, I don't know what that is. And they said, we think you're what it is. Because I also had an MBA, and so I kind of had that confluence of, you know, business, health, and I, you know, was doing a lot of ethnographic research through marketing. And so that was my path. So it was really funny because I was like so deliberately, strategically searching for what was next. And then it was through a project that I worked on. And so I actually got hired as a business designer, but I don't identify as one because I was in the health practice, and so much of the work we did was patient and provider experience. So it was more often service design, experience design, and I would play the role of design researcher in most projects. So that's what I identify with. And that's when I'm operating individually, and then when I'm working with teams, I enjoy leading multidisciplinary teams. That's kind of my sweet spot because I like thinking about all the different types of design. And I think even in the digital world, you know, we often think, oh, all there is what we call now product design. But there's always so much more. There's always a bit of service design, of brand design at least, and sometimes space or physical product and packaging. And so my sweet spot, I think, is taking that marketing background and rooting the whole experience in all of those different touch points, rooting it in like what is the brand, what is the value proposition, and then making sure all of those things, all of those touch points deliver on that.
Aisha, I think I know that you never use only one title.
I can't. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I really can't. But I would say like I come from interaction design. And then I went into design research, and then I did design operations. So a lot of my work actually was like designing the way people work and actually co-designing. So designing with people and figuring out like what's a better way to work. Nowadays, I still consider myself a designer because this is a way of seeing the world, I think. It's a way of showing up. And so I coach people, so a leadership coach. I do team collaboration, so we are learning like conscious collaboration. I create curriculums and for parents, teachers, and children of all ages to learn about attachment theory. So it's how do you relate with people? I do all kinds of things, and sometimes it's a little bit more actually graphic design, and sometimes I have to jump in and do more like interaction and with people. One of the things I think that is different now that I'm coaching and teaching and facilitating versus before when I was more like in like doing interaction design or design research. I think a big difference is that I don't just, the way I've been doing design, it was a lot of mental. So it's a lot of like conceptual and organizing idea and connecting ideas and things like that, which is great. I found that, to be a good coach, to be doing what I do now well, I have to bring in the emotional, I have to get in touch with my own emotions. It has been work because I was in that head area. So for me to like go down and like understand people more, like grow my emotional intelligence. And then also I realized, wow, one of the biggest blind spots I had is actually my body intelligence, my somatic intelligence. So now when I design something for a group, for example, a team, and we're going to be 3 days and like learning how to do conscious collaboration, or whether it's like even creating a curriculum for kids to learn about how to build healthy relationships, I bring in the different layers from the mind, so the intellect, the heart, the emotional intelligence, and the somatic intelligence. And that is been making things more rich. And sometimes it means that I'm going to clown, honestly. Sometimes it means that I'm going to bring in, we're going to move the body and we're going to do stuff differently. And I'd say like a lot of the material I bring in my design is actually my own experience, so my history, but also I make myself try new things all the time. You can contact me for resources. I try things all the time, especially physically, to push, because when we do that, we expand our capacity to sense and we expand our intuition. And so I'm always on like trying things, all manners of things. Right now, I sing and in a group, like collectively. And doing that, I've learned so much that I can then bring into the way I design things. So, I could go, talk about it for hours, but what I'm trying to say is like, I bring, like whenever I come in and I create an experience with people, I bring all these learnings that coming out from outside the design for just like how I sit with myself and how I sit with other people and sensing.
Does that resonate with people? Are many of us spending too much time up here in our heads instead of in our bodies? That's really interesting.
Can we jump in?
Please do.
So I sing too. And yeah, that completely resonates as well, just bringing in all those different parts of what we do. And I think one thing I'm finding is that with design now, there's, everything is, we're being asked to move more and more quickly with everything. And I find one of my favorite things about design is analogous research. And folks I've worked with know this and feel the same. And I feel like there's less and less time to do that. And so it's really important as designers to keep doing that in your personal lives and trying different things and taking those lessons. And I do that with choir too. I mean, whether it's design or even like as an example to make it tangible, like management lessons. So for example, the founding director of the group that I'm in, resoundensemble.org. We have concerts coming up in May.
Should all go experience singing,
yes, that's really important advice as designers. I remember our founding director, he said when he was creating the group, and he was talking about the size of the ensemble, he said he wanted to make it small enough that every voice mattered, that it would make a difference if someone wasn't at rehearsal. You would hear it. But that he also wanted to make it big enough that everyone felt supported. And that just, I loved that. And so as I then created or built a team at Sutter, I had that in mind. Granted, we had a hiring freeze then due to COVID, but the original vision was thinking about that size. Like, how do we make sure that the team is big enough that everyone feels supported, but also small enough that everyone really has an impact. So it's, I couldn't agree more. We're just taking, those analogous inspiration in your life, if you can't do it in your job, and bringing it in.
Yeah, it's just to continue a little bit. By seeing how other people create, we go through life doing all these experiences. Like, it could be singing, it could be Tai Chi, it could be painting, whatever. Like, by seeing how people think about the moment and how they design whatever they design from a different angle, it actually enriches so much our own practice and whatever we do. And so it's to me, I have to, I feel like it's part of my lifestyle now, that I have to incorporate this regular shifting and trying different, being beginner all the time and learning all the time, because it makes me a better a coach, leader, teacher. It's just enriches my connection with other people as well.
And what's the name of your group? so we can put in a plug for
it's
that
called
too.
Sing Circle.
Okay.
And it's Bobby McFerrin started this method. There's going to be one soon in May. I can share that.
It's in our future.
Yes, we have your social calendar lined up for May.
So Priyanka and Cole, where do you sing in groups?
In the bathroom.
I'm singing rhymes to my daughter lately.
Yes, there you go. At home in your child's bedroom. Beautiful. Yes.
I'm reflecting on both of your experiences, and I think the sort of shape shifting or trying different things that really resonates with me, because when I think about even my journey as a designer and even coming into Headspace, I realized that as a designer, I was really focusing on, back then when I joined, it's how do I get someone to take action on what they want to work on, right? And then we saw in our metrics, we have this beautifully designed program, it's clinically rigorous, all of that, but people are not taking action, right? So that led me to actually work more closely with our clinical experts and our psychologists and therapists, right? How do they approach helping someone move forward in their interactions, and then also training to be a mental health coach. So is Leah out here. A bunch of us are now trained mental health coaches, because when you I studied in psychology through the mental health coach training, that people are self-deterministic. You can't force them. People come to those, intentions and decisions by themselves. You can do things to nudge them and ask open-ended questions to get them along that process. But really, humans, want to be the drivers of their own, lives and future, right? So. To me, I think it's led me to think about how do we actually design spaces for that kind of reflection. Right? So it's not action, but spaces for reflection, asking questions, and that's where a lot of our work is being centered lately at Headspace too, which is it's a digital space, whether you're talking to a provider or to AI, helping you process all the things that you might be experiencing, and then you get to your answers yourself. And then in the places where you do need more support, that is when you might, seek that kind of support and action. So really shifting the mindset towards not pushing someone towards the, what you might think is right for them. They will figure out what's right for them.
Make it available and give them spaces to learn that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Cole, can I change the question for you and ask you, how did you know you wanted to be an industrial designer?
I didn't even know what that was.
Right.
So I remember taking things apart and just being kind of curious about the world, and for me, it was, I guess, kind of growing early in my career, the way that I've shifted about my role and what I do kind of leads into that question too, where early on it was mostly about style. It was about form and style, right? Automotive design is much of that. And then through meeting people over my career, meeting engineers, meeting researchers and marketers, user experience designers, you start to build a bigger picture for what style is, and style becomes design. I think design is right in between artistry and engineering, at least for an industrial designer. So I feel like, being brave, as you were talking about branching out and trying new things, I feel very fortunate to be in an agency like this where we're rubbing shoulders with engineers and digital and brand designers, and also the sheer amount of variety of work. You don't have much time for that research. We might have a phase 0 that's a week long. Mm-hmm. All right, get up to speed, meet some industry experts, and then get on with it. And so, especially for healthcare products, you have to become kind of an industry expert really fast to be able to solve problems. And we don't have, at least as an agency, we don't have a long lead time to do that. So it's, for me, I think it's at least what an industrial designer means to me is really being able to kind of turn one side of my brain off and the other, where I'm going back and forth between being an artist and creating something beautiful that somebody's going to fall in love with. But it has to work at the same time. So, it's trying to, I try and put myself in, a digital designer's shoes, where you're thinking about the workflow of an app screen and a layout, but then to also think about the way it's going to be coded on the firmware side and everything all at the same time would be really interesting. So, it's the variety keeps us sharp, because we're forced to do it, right? A new project comes in the door and it might be a quantum computer. I don't know anything about it, and this was a couple years ago, and so we worked with a couple companies since then, but to just be brave enough to jump in and ask questions, and sometimes the questions that I'm asking, I feel stupid when I'm asking those questions, but they're questions that no one's ever asked. These industry experts who are, heads down in a particular topic, surgeons, the same thing, so it keeps it fresh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the fun thing about being in consulting, is the constant switch and deep dive.
Yeah, so head in the cloud sometimes is really great, but then you have to come back down and go back up, come back down.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the next is about designing in the healthcare space. So any of you can jump in with this, some of the unique challenges of designing in the health space.
I guess I'll keep going because it's on my brain here. I think for us, almost every project, once you're in it, is very similar. The approach setting up is different. So for healthcare, being more of an expert in the product that you're going to design and who you're designing it for matters so much more. This might be something that a surgeon's using and it's going in the body to pull out blood clot. That is critical, versus a router that's fun to design, but it sits there and it looks pretty and it just connects you to the internet. So you have to really be way more disciplined about the decisions you're making up front, about medical or healthcare, really disciplined and self-critical too, not trying to jump to conclusions too quickly. And the best projects, the best solutions we came up with for products were ones where we didn't do desk research. It wasn't about sitting at a desk and trying to find articles and even videos. This stuff is hard to find. And a lot of it's secret science. If it's a DNA sequencing machine, you can't find information on that, or it's really hard. And so it really takes time to sit behind the people who are doing the work and watching them and asking those silly questions. There was kicking off one of these projects, it was a surgical product that went in the venous part of your leg up through your pulmonary arteries and pulled out blood clots right around here. And we were just kicking off. It was part of the phase 0 research that we do, and we're all covered in lead jackets standing behind a surgeon who's done this for 30 years, and asking him just dumb questions. It's like sitting, looking over his shoulder, and he's like, looking at us all weird. Why'd you do that? What's, you know, there's human lungs and a heart over here in a formaldehyde bath, and we've got masks on, and it's bizarre, but to just like shake it off and get in the moment and just ask questions and be really curious. You have to kind of be a little kid and then soak it all up, document it, and then think about designing a product that's really meaningful and not just looks great. So that's what's challenging. The product that looks great, somebody's going to buy, but it's not going to work. And then the product that's engineered is going to work flawlessly, but nobody's going to buy it. So somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Same thing for healthcare products.
Yeah. And like the discipline and the sort of noviceness of like, none of us are healthcare experts. So to design into that, maybe you are, but often the designers aren't healthcare experts. So those both really resonate as a healthcare challenge.
I'll add to it, like from like designing within a healthcare delivery system. I think one of the challenges that's also really interesting is just you're constantly designing for different types of stakeholders. So it's really complex because you have to think about not just the patient who might be using something, but the provider who might be recommending something, and also, maybe the payer, which could be a commercial insurer or it could be the government, and then there's stakeholders within the health system. So I think we found, at Sutter, and I've worked with both Candace and Elliot, who are also in the audience at Sutter. It was really important to understand, to get clinical partners, both folks who are on the ground and actively seeing patients, so that you could learn about their experiences, get access to patients, and also then get buy-in early on from senior leaders, and also get buy-in from operators. So that was kind of a big learning for us, especially as an innovation team, because we could dream up something, but if we didn't have partners who are willing to let us prototype it, and then partners at the top who are willing to fund things, and then operators who are willing to keep things going, your great idea might last as a prototype or a pilot, and then it might, filter out. So I think that was one big learning for me at Sutter. And then the other thing I'll share is just as a researcher, and again, I think it's an interesting design research constraint, but you have to be a lot more sensitive to privacy when you're doing research. And so that's, so for example, I'd worked for Planned Parenthood when I was at IDEO, and we were really careful around patient privacy, and so even just how we documented research, we couldn't take pictures of people's faces, so we had to get creative. So we ended up taking pictures of people's hands, because hands can be really expressive but not identifying, so that we could still document and still tell a story ultimately to the client in an emotional way, but without people's faces. And we obviously changed people's names, and then we got voiceover actors to read things so that we weren't using people's voices. So getting, creative on patient privacy is something you need to do as a design researcher, and also think about, I've been doing this more in recent years, but trauma-informed design research, because you can have very emotional conversations, you're talking about intimate topics, so I think it's also important to make sure, that if you're going out in the field, that you're not like re-triggering people, for example, and there are a ton of great resources now online about that.
Beautiful. Yeah, I find healthcare to be like more relational. Like they're very, very distributed, very like everybody has to be considered.
Yes.
It's not as hierarchical as I would expect. Instead, it's like, we're going to carefully check in with everybody involved.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for physical products in medical, surgical, healthcare field, because a lot of the products we work on, they go through years and years of FDA trial, and they're oftentimes shoved into hospitals, and so it might be one of two solutions, that there aren't a lot of options, or it's the first of its kind. And so the different people in the stakeholders that you mentioned, one of them is your client. They might be surgeons on the other side of the table, but there's this end user who has the surgery coming up in, maybe 2 years, right? They're on a long-term plan to better their life, and so the surgery might be something that's, gets them shaken, and they're worried about it, and their family's worried about it, and so to design something that does that job but looks so calm and easy. This equipment, it's like, that's it. Yeah, we're just going to go in your body, but it's just a little piece of plastic. Don't worry about it. And so sometimes those new the end user we don't actually get to talk to, but that's a tough one to design something for somebody that you can't actually interact with. So there's a lot of trying to put your mind in that patient and just imagine them on the other side of the table that's about to get surgery or a tumor pulled out and what they might be feeling. And so you're trying to ease their mind through this product laid out on the table as the surgeons explain to them. That's also this whole tangible piece that's like, it's difficult to design for.
And I'm glad you brought up caregivers. Like family caregivers are really another really important stakeholder, and I feel like they aren't often thought about, and sometimes they're the ones making the healthcare decisions for their family members. So they're a user to consider who doesn't always get considered.
I've been thinking about what you said, Charu, about the payer being in the picture. Like in the case of like mental health, like I think healthcare in general in the US, it's not something people pay out of pocket easily. So like oftentimes it's like, it's like either a employer benefit, like in Headspace's case, it is an employer benefit. That's one of our channels. But that does create like unique challenges where like an employer benefit oftentimes is underutilized, and especially when it comes to mental health, like people have more apprehensions as to like, is my employer actually going to know when I utilize the service, right? So it's like, on one hand, we probably get, one of the things that the employer is checking for is if the benefit is utilized, but the fact that it is an employer benefit is one of the reasons it's not utilized. So we have to be like really delicate there, like kind of thinking of, what makes for a compelling experience, really respecting user privacy, at what level are we presenting data to, employers. Like it's at an aggregated level. We'll of course like never share like individual data, but it's definitely a tricky space where you really need to understand the business, the dynamics of like how a service or how a benefit is delivered to a person, because that really impacts like how it gets utilized.
That's interesting. So you could offer a service with the best hopes possible, but then it's never utilized because they're afraid to tell their boss they need some days off. I need to take some days off. Why? It's like,
Exactly.
it's like something tricky to talk about.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I'm curious, have you found that there are certain features that don't get utilized when it's it's through an employer?
I think in general, like discoverability is low. I think that's one thing that I think Headspace is probably better than like a lot of the other companies, where we actually take a lot of active efforts in terms of socializing our services within the organization. And we also do coaching of employers as to how do they better like talk about our services. So it's kind of like we offer consulting services almost to the employer as to how do you talk about mental health within your organization, like what are the best practices. So there's a lot of like socialization that way. But that's a good question. I might have to like look at our metrics, but
MBA and design research coming together in that question.
That's, and then on the other hand, like we also have our health plans. So Headspace is offered through health plans as well. And like say like Kaiser or Blue Cross, they really care about, are you delivering the outcomes that you've promised, right? So then utilization is important, but then it's also important that people actually self-report, like are they feeling better or not? And so it's like, as a designer, that's like a lot of responsibility, because like who likes to answer surveys? Anyone here? Yeah. So a lot of like our responsibility as a designer is also how do you make these sort of like check-in and survey like, experiences more compelling, so that people don't think of it as work, but as something that could be valuable for them as well. So interesting challenges in terms of like literally like Kaiser and Blue Cross Blue Shield wouldn't pay us if they don't know that people are actually deriving real value out of our experience. There's like a interesting like business challenge there.
And you need to design the measure of your impact as much as the
So we need to measure we have to have metrics that are recognized by Kaiser and other health partners. So there are validated like measures for that. But then, so it's also like even designing around those validated measures, surveys are so boring. So boring.
That's why they come with a $10 gift card.
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So they're so boring, and then people are like answering these surveys in the context of an app. And Headspace has like in general like a very like playful, approachable like brand, but yet those surveys sound really clinical. So this is like a constant tension for a designer. It's like, how do we make this language a little bit more friendly? And then our clinical team will be like, no, 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 it's a validated measure. You can't change that question. So that's an ongoing challenge. I'm just saying.
How do you balance the seriousness, which might be boring, or the playfulness of the app, and then trust? You know, because I feel like if it's too playful, then people lose trust in its.
Yeah, and I think we've done actually, I would say, a decent job, because I think our credibility, or like people report us as a credible brand, but that's partly because also we like really surface our clinical specialty in our product. So when we are designing programs, they are designed by clinical psychologists, and those voices are often like visible in our product. I mean, Headspace does a pretty good job at PR, I think. So yeah, but these are unique challenges. Like you have to balance a lot of incentives and like really understand the system and the dynamics, which are like unique to healthcare.
Aisha, yeah, please.
So the main challenge for me is that designing for mental health and like collaboration, things like that, like building trust, and it's like almost like you have people there in the room, and then you have this invisible thing that is, for example, it could be emotional intelligence, like a fear, or it could be, I work a lot with blind spots. So like we all have things that we don't know are blocking us, but they repeatedly like kind of get in the way of our goals, right? So they're like invisible things. And so it's kind of interesting, because if you work with someone and you say, hey, look, there's like a pink elephant, can you see it? It's like right there, like it's huge right here. It doesn't work that way. Like people don't see it, or they'll totally reject the notion. And so you have to kind of like slowly, like help them sense it and feel it, not mentally, and then it can take a while, and then suddenly they like have this epiphany, like, oh my gosh, this pink elephant is giant. Like, how come I never saw that before, right? So it's interesting for me, like to have to design with something invisible, unspoken, without talking about it, and helping people get to a point where they can see it. So one-on-one, it's already really interesting dance, but imagine with a team, to have the whole team get to the moment where they all see the elephant. They're like, what? And so it's kind of a cool exercise it takes a lot of like sensing and being really in line with people, even at the nervous system level, being aligned with people and being at a rhythm where layers can start being peeled off. So, yeah.
Does anyone have an example of a time when you've been able to reimagine care?
I can share an example. Well, it's like a little thought exercise with the audience first, if that's okay. A silent thought exercise. So I would love for just folks to think about, when you think of the word health or healthcare, think about what words come to mind, like descriptive words, adjectives, adverbs. Give you a couple seconds.
Patient.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Healing.
Thank you. And I was going to, does everyone have some words in their mind? Wonderful. And now I'm curious, if anyone thought of the word joyful, can you raise your hand? So that's something I think, and I love, Priyanka, you use the word playful, which I thought was wonderful, and that's great to hear that that's a big part of the Headspace brand. So I feel like folks who are reimagining care, I think, are trying to incorporate joy and play. And this came from a project that Candace actually had led and pulled me into, which was Scout by Sutter Health. And so this was a youth mental health app. And through our research, and this is where, again, like I know we are doing so much stuff online and moving quickly, but I still just really believe in the power of in-person design research. So a couple of us were spending time at an adolescent psychiatric wing at one of Sutter's hospitals, and we were observing with people's consent and guardians' consent. We were observing group therapy sessions, rounds, discharge conversations, et cetera. And during one of the group therapy sessions, it was just getting started. I was like getting my notebook out, and the facilitator was passing around worksheets. And as soon as she did that, I just overheard one of the young people. I always feel so old when I say young people, but youth, adolescents, I don't know. Yeah, heard one of the young people say, like more homework. And like right then, just it was kind of one of those light bulb moments. And then that like instantly connected to analogous research Candace and I had done, which is a longer story that I won't go into because it's harder to explain, but it made sense. And then it connected to clinical conversations we had had with folks who are pediatric behavioral therapists. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, this is part of the reason why some of these traditional CBT and DBT tools aren't working for this demographic, because mental health is so serious oftentimes, and like kids are not serious, and by the way, neither should adults be all the time either. And so that was a big insight for us, just incorporating joy into what we were offering. And so some of the features that we developed were around like, how do you help these people reconnect to joy? So for example, one of the people we had interviewed talked about how when he went to an inpatient residential program, it was nice because it took him away from the stressors of school, but it also took him away from marching band. So like you're removing people from stressors, you're also removing them from joy sometimes. So just this notion of incorporating joy back into health. I think this was a tiny sliver of it, so I don't know if it's quite reimagining care, but just starting to, and would love to challenge everyone to think about joy and playfulness, and like it shouldn't have to be so serious all the time.
I was thinking the notion of joy and healthcare combined, has there been teams working on this for decades and nobody's cracked it, or is there some modern cultural shift catalyst that is kind of, is it technology, is it consumer facing things that have kind of forced their way into healthcare to bring more joy? Or is it a new conversation, or has it been a long time coming? Nobody's
in their cute design.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, I think Headspace XR is another example, like designing for youth. So we have an experience in the metaverse, just saying, where people can be in this like immersive like landscape, and you kind of like find these like mindful moments on the way. So it's not like, it feels more like you are in this environment and like having fun, and like, like these little moments can be fun.
And because we talked to a clinician who would do group sessions with teens, and she said she would specifically carve out moments for them to be playful and joyful. Like, I think Kimmer was like water balloons, or that sounds messy, but something, she would do something to just like let them be kids, especially because if they're going through all these programs and doctor's appointments. And so, that's fantastic that part of that product specifically to that audience is that way.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other, our content team is actually really good at this. One of the things that we have on our app is called the Daily Wake Up, which is just like positive things happening in the world, that we kind of like showcase each day. And there are some people who just come to Headspace for that. So like health doesn't have to be a negative or uncomfortable experience always. There will be, sometimes discomfort is good and it's healthy because it helps you move forward. But recognizing those little moments of joy in your day, having like a little bit more gratitude in your day for like all the things that you do have that are going well. So like, how do you encourage these like moments of like even reflection? I mean, that's also part of our like Instagram strategy too, like where people might be like doom scrolling and then suddenly there'll be like a little breather, like because you follow Headspace, there might be like a little breather that you take, like a deep breath, like a little dot goes up and down. And then that maybe gives you a deliberate pause. Oh, I have been doom scrolling for like an hour. Like, is it time for me to exit Instagram? So it's like finding little moments like that, like where you can achieve even, alternate ways to be more present with yourself, which helps someone's mental health.
Yeah, In somatic coach, so somatic experiencing is a practice, and also in integral coaching. So like these two I work with, you have to inject actually joy is part of it because it's a resource. So there's a way in which we deplete ourselves, like in our nervous system or in our emotions, and actually joy is kind of like filling the battery for you. And so you have to kind of like, they call it titrate. So like go from like, okay, like we're replacing resource. Okay, now we can touch on something difficult. And then go back. And so like this whole thing of titration is actually the basic way that people work in somatic coaching.
That sounds like a great design principle.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah. And so that's something that, say, if I do a team experience, I will make sure that it would be part of it. As when, like I see the energy of people through the day, but also I see like, okay, we're going to talk about something difficult later, so like how about we like recharge first, and then like we have enough that we can go deeper into something difficult or challenging. So I love that you named that because it's a huge principle in designing for mental health.
So I have two last questions, and then we'll get to Q&A in about 7 minutes-ish, so you can think of your own questions as well. So what are the barriers you're wrestling with at the moment in your work, and what strategies have you found to make progress? And I think people are particularly interested in like, what works? What helps you push back? What helps you overcome the challenges that design faces?
The one that tends to be a persistent challenge for me, and I've heard like also in a lot of other startup environments, is the desire to move fast and like the emphasis on short-term thinking. Like, let's do something quickly, let's solve this quickly now. And when really we also need to focus like thinking more long-term. And this is a constant tension. I think, Rachel, you mentioned this morning too. And I think the things that have been helpful for me, like I love a good framework. So like building, and actually building a framework in alignment with your cross-functional partners. So a shared aligned framework. So in my case, like I did that, like when I joined Headspace, I saw like a lot of emphasis on like daily engagement. And I didn't really see a larger part towards like how are we supporting someone long term, like over a year. So that was my provocation. Like, what does an experience with Headspace look like if we had to like support someone for a year? What changes do they go through the year, which of course like can be so varied, right? Like for anyone, because we are like addressing a myriad of like health challenges, but there are change frameworks. There's like a common framework for change, it's called trans-theoretical model of change or stages of change. But essentially it's like people go through a process of change. There'll be a phase when they are not ready for change, then they'll start to prepare for it, and then they will get to action. And there will be inevitably times where like you are in action, but like how many times I do this, I want to eat healthy, I'll eat healthy for a week, and then like fall off. And that's just common part of like human behavior. Like that's how humans are, right? Like we have momentum and then we like sometimes like have a setback, right? So there is a theory of change that helps you like visualize it. So I contextualized a year's journey of a member with these like model of changes. And then like when our teams are focusing on specific features on their roadmap, I'm like, okay, sure, like this is helping you move this specific metric at this point in time, but what does that mean for like the overall journey? So like having these frameworks that I built that framework, like I don't know, like 3 years back, and I still come back to it as like a grounding artifact. So like I would say build more frameworks. And then, of course, you need alignment on that framework together. And then building a framework, but then also aligning on shared metrics. So like, what is the impact that you're striving for? How do you measure it long term? How do you measure it short term? Connecting the dots between the two, because sometimes it can happen that your short-term metrics don't actually align with your long-term metrics. So for like, facilitating that conversation and connecting the dots with even your strategic leaders, I think. that is the key. Like long-term metrics matter.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Some of the biggest challenges we have here, and I think in industrial design and probably in all of our creative processes, but it's, I mean, of course, with agency projects, there's budget, there's timeline, there's a lot of stakeholders that want a voice in the trajectory of their project, and they're paying you to help facilitate that. But I think there's trust in the creative process is a big challenge. It's what we do, and we're comfortable with ambiguity, but sometimes they're hiring us as the creative voice and then bringing them along for that ride, and sometimes that is hard for a lot of clients, especially ones that are, they're mathematical, they're scientific, they have to work through a process, and sometimes our process is a giant ball of yarn, and you just keep tugging on it looking for the other end. And so you try and explain that, and you're like, no, we're gonna get there, no, trust, we're gonna get there. And so we have, you know, frameworks that we try and put in place to help guide us through that, and sometimes the framework gets thrown away and we keep moving forward. And so yeah, that's a big challenge. And I think
Works, like how do you convince people to relax into the creative process?
exposing truth in our work.
Yeah.
So if we just focus on aesthetics, that's subjective. Some people like this. I like black and I like white. And you get in this, you know, voice of opinion. Everyone is designing. Everyone comes together and it looks like a marshmallow. You know, it's like this non-object. Nobody could form an opinion, and so you have a lot of aesthetics that get blended. But if you can find truth in user needs, truth in environment, does it have to be waterproof? Is it, what are the cost targets, the components that go on the inside? So I mean, truth in our solution isn't just physical, but there's truth in people's needs and their daily life, and you know, their rituals and habits. And so you can kind of pull out these threads, and what you design should be able to point to all those, and it's really hard to dispute. And so through that creative process, you start to pull on those as truths and inject those into the final concept, and it eases their mind a little bit more.
Right, it shows them that you're not
Yeah.
just throwing spaghetti on the wall. You actually have
Even though
these
sometimes we are.
concepts. Yeah. And that can be great.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. You guys?
I was gonna say, like, this really resonates with me, like, on any project to, like, have a shared definition of, like, why we are working on something, and, like, defining on the impact and the criteria oftentimes is, like, your source of truth, and, like, you come back and ground yourself in those objectives and goals as a team, so there's less dissonance.
Great.
Yeah, I completely agree with what's been said, and I do feel like the speed challenge has been what I've seen more lately, and I think so. Two things that come to mind as ways to address that. One is, you know, using the tools that you have. There are tools like DScout and user testing, et cetera, that do allow you to move more quickly. Again, I'm still a big fan of. I think you learn more things when you can do in context research. And so then if you have, you know, like invite your client or your whoever's kind of pushing against that, you know, or your boss or whoever it is, to some of that in-person research, and then I think that helps them to see the value, and then they're excited, and then they're spouting some of the same truth in terms of the user needs, and yeah, that's one way to help kind of pull people in or get their buy-in while also moving quickly as they're wanting to.
In person is really important. We
Yeah.
still find it really important.
Yeah.
So we have some projects where we've gone 6 months and have never seen them in person. You got a Zoom call each week, and sometimes a text or an email gets misinterpreted a certain way, and you're checking the calendar and going back to the PM, and it becomes kind of arduous to get through that project. But then we've had clients who live up the road, and they come in every single week. And it's like you sit at the table upstairs, and you just work through problems, and you sketch, and you draw on the whiteboard, and you're looking at presentations, and so that's huge.
Barriers and strategies? Aisha?
Yeah, for me, like a barrier that I found is, so I'm on this path that is uncharted. So I've always been, before it was like, you know, working, and there's like this line, and I can jump from line to line. There was like kind of a lane that I could, like a map that I could go through. And right now I'm just making it up as I go, sensing, and like actually the thing that I offer for people to do, like I'll embody them and sensing, and so I'm at the point now where I feel like the barrier is more like, oh, I'm realizing working those collaborators who get it, like get like where my alignment and like working together in that way, and always think about not just okay, yeah, we have like the same mission of helping people being more like conscious collaborators. That's one thing you can find people, but it's like think about like the how we do things, how that feeds into the results, right? And it's really, to me, that's like really important to take my time to find those collaborators, because if we talk about creating conscious collaboration, how do we then like together like find a person where it is going to feel like it, right? It's going to feel like supporting each other no matter what. It's going to feel like helping each other grow collectively. And so I think it's the way I go about it is actually like finding these people and like doing small projects, like little things, and then seeing how we feel together, and then create inside of like in the collective, like create what we offer other people to experience. And so yeah, so that's
Beautiful. You're prefiguring.
yeah.
Prefiguring the futures that you want. If I'm going to get into my future stuff. So for this last question, and I love asking this question, I want you all to think about it. And you guys, in the interest of time, answer quickly. If your work and your passion that you're working on right now were ridiculously successful, what would the future look like? What would be enabled through you being ridiculously successful?
I think the thing that came to mind for me is that we wouldn't have to say like women's health or mental health or, fill in the blank health, because that would all be inherent when you just say the word health. Like it would all be included. It wouldn't be a separate benefit. It wouldn't be separate companies. Like that would just be, healthcare would just be inclusive in those ways.
Beautiful. Wow.
For me, it would be, whenever something, like there's a team working together and they get their result and they do things at the end that for everyone to feel really good about the team, feeling really good about how they work together, feel like they grew together in the process of making this product. If this is like a standard experience for people working, it sounds like it's impossible, but I know because I've seen people move from absolute disaster to wow, like actually we're in it together and we can like rely on each other to do this. I've seen that transformation. And so if that can be a more common experience that you learn in school, even like before you go to work, right? That would be like the ridiculous future that I'm hoping for.
Yeah. Love it. Mine are, of course, focused on mental health. I think so much of mental health is like introspection, gaining more self-awareness, and building these skills that help you cope and thrive. So when I think about like if we were to be immensely successful, people are more resilient, believe more in their strengths and capacity, and have the right skills and confidence to move forward. I think a world where we are kinder to ourselves and to each other. And even with like people you disagree, like there's kindness. And then the third bit I had was with greater self-awareness, acting with more intention, lesser reactivity. So it's not like you take the first action that comes to your mind, taking that pause, like, and taking actions with more intention. I think those would be my three.
Yeah. I want to live in that future.
I'm on this one. I'm on this dream too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in my mind, it's maybe more tangible. I wish we had more time to do the right job. Sometimes it feels like we work really fast and we have to trust our gut, and we're up against budget. And so it's like, cost, time, money, all that really drives how successful a product is. And you try and sometimes having too much time, you end up spinning your wheels, and that idea you had in day one was actually pretty good. But just more time to let things simmer and feel good and feel like you got all your ideas out and you were making the right decision.
Yeah, I'd like to design like that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. All right, so that ends my formal questioning.